Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Melissa Lujan, and I'm Associate with the National Center on Substance Abuse and Child Welfare. So I'd like to welcome you to the second webinar of the New England Practice and Policy webinar series, Screening and Assessment for Family Engagement and Retention, and I'd like to pass it over to our Director of the National Center, Dr. Nancy Young.
Thank you, Melissa, and welcome to all of you on the East Coast, where it may be a little bit more chilly than where we're located in Southern California today. We appreciate very much you taking your time to join us to discuss and to get some information on meeting the needs of families in the child welfare system who are affected by substance use disorders, specifically about screening and assessment with a focus on how we do that screening and assessment for family engagement and retention. I'm joined today actually by two folks, both Dr. Sarah Becker, who is the director at the New England Addiction Technology Transfer Center, which is based at Brown University. And then in a little bit, you'll be hearing from Linda Carpenter, who is a program director with the National Center on Substance Abuse and Child Welfare. For those of you who are not familiar, the National Center was established in 2002 by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration and the Children's Bureau in order to provide a national resource that develops knowledge and shares information and is a bit of a clearinghouse, but also we think a bit more than just sending out information, but a place where you can come to ask questions and to get guidance and to hear about the experiences of other jurisdictions around the country who have put together various kinds of efforts and models to address the needs of families who are affected by substance abuse and child abuse and neglect. If you have not visited our website, at the end we'll have lots of information about how to find us and how to contact us if you have questions or specific technical assistance needs, that we would encourage you to be in touch with us. And a whole host of resources that are available on our website. And again, we'll make sure that you have that link at the end of the presentation to be able to get easily to our website and look at the resources that are available. With that, let me quickly turn things over to Sarah to give a brief introduction about the New England Addiction Technology Transfer Center. Sarah?
Hello, everyone, and thank you to Nancy for that introduction. On behalf of the New England Addiction Technology Transfer Center, I just wanted to share how delighted we are to be partnering with the National Center to create a learning community to highlight the issues facing child welfare, substance use treatment providers, and the court. We're hoping that this learning community can help leverage knowledge and innovation in practice and policy approaches from both the work of the National Center and our work at the New England Addiction Technology Transfer Center. By way of background on the New England Addiction Technology Transfer Center, we are part of a broader network that was established in 1993 by SAMHSA, and we celebrated our 20th anniversary last October. Our network is comprised of 10 regional centers, 4 national focus area centers that address specialized topics viewed as important across the network and that require dedicated focus, such as working with historically underserved populations, and a network coordinating office. We're able to provide coverage for all 50 U.S. states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and several Pacific Islands. And our mission is really threefold. First, we aim to raise awareness and skills of the workforce that serves individuals affected by substance use disorders. And we define that workforce broadly as encompassing both practitioners in traditional substance use treatment agencies, as well as treatment providers in allied healthcare settings, including the child welfare system that we'll be talking about today. Second, we aim to accelerate the adoption and implementation of evidence-based practices. And third, we aim to foster regional and national alliances among diverse clinicians, researchers, policymakers, funders, and the recovery community. Moving along, when we first began discussion about this webinar series, moving to the next slide, we sent out a planning survey to key stakeholders throughout the New England region in order to assess their training needs related to working with families in the child welfare system affected by substance use disorders. And we received 63 responses with representation across all 6 states and across multiple treatment settings. And when we asked the respondents to select their areas of greatest training need, and then we rank ordered their responses, we found that 65.6% of respondents, or almost 2/3, selected retention and engagement of families in treatment as one of their areas of greatest training need. And if you look at the right side of your screen, an additional almost 1/3 of participants also selected substance use screening and assessment as a key area of need. So that is why we decided to focus on this topic today of doing screening and assessing in order to improve family engagement and retention, so that we could really try to meet two of the needs that were selected by a number of the respondents across our region. Moving along, I'd like to talk you through our agenda for today. We're going to proceed through 5 sections. Next, we'll have a national perspective on screening and assessment for family engagement and retention. That will take about 15 minutes. Then we'll move into an in-depth case example led by Connecticut's Recovery Specialist Voluntary Program Collaborative. That will take about 45 minutes. The next 2 sections will be about 5 minutes each. We'll briefly give you an overview of some national resources and tools, and then a brief overview of the next webinar in this educational series. And then we'll conclude with about 10 minutes for any discussion or question and answer that you all might have who are participating today. So with that, I'm delighted to turn it over to Linda Carpenter, who will give us the national perspective on screening and assessment.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon. We're going to talk briefly through some basic principles with screening, assessment, engagement, and retention of families in the child welfare system with substance use issues. And a lot of this information comes from our work with sites across the country, lessons learned from working with state, local, and tribal jurisdictions. What we want to talk about with you is basically 4 basic principles of, 1, the importance of early screening, assessment and access to treatment, the importance of engagement, and then finally really rethinking this notion of treatment readiness. What we talk about with sites is that one of the first things you have to do is really look at your own mission and underlying values, and then you need to talk with your partners and really look at where you're aligned and where your differences occur with those. And in particular, when you look at this list, and this is not an all-inclusive list by any means, but look at things like your differences in perception of addiction, recovery, and parenting, and what that means when you're working collaboratively to serve these families. Who you identify as your primary client. Is it the parent? Is it the child? And hopefully when you're working in this fashion that you really start to look at the needs of the whole family. So the first issue is really looking at the importance of early screening and identification. And I will tell you that when in our work with sites across the country, this is one of the things that comes up most often. When you listen to child welfare staff and anecdotal reports, they will tell you that parental substance use is a factor in as many as 85 to 90% of the cases. But when you look at some of the data around this and look at some of the research, you'll see that in 61% of the cases, confirmed drug or alcohol dependence was missed in the majority of the cases. We hear from social workers across the country that either they don't know how to identify parental substance use early on, or if they do identify it, they're not quite sure what to do with it. Currently, there's no state that does universal screening for all child welfare cases. States that do screen or jurisdictions that screen might do it at different points in time with their cases. Some states and localities that report higher rates of substance abuse identification have really focused on a couple of really critical issues. One is worker training. And worker training doesn't mean just knowing how to use a tool or how to implement the tool or implement it consistently. It really is a good understanding of addiction as a chronic progressive disease, of engagement, what is recovery, the role that trauma plays, and really how to work with their partners effectively. The other thing that's critical for this, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, is the importance of interagency agreements, and particularly things with what happens if you get a positive screen. How do you work with those partners to ensure those parents are assessed and into treatment? So if you're a child welfare agency and you're looking at implementing a screening tool, whether that's universal or for a specific population, you really want to look at some critical questions. You want to really want to understand who it is that you're going to screen. Are you looking at the notion of screening in versus screening out? Do you believe that substance use is such a factor in your cases that you would be screening out cases rather than screening in? How are referrals made for assessments, and what's your communication with your partners Do your partners accept your screening results? Do you follow up with parents? Do you look at screening only when it's a safety issue? Are you only identifying substance use when it's so apparent that you couldn't possibly miss it? And one of the things that I think has come up for us more recently is, are you screening for certain substances that you consider a greater concern, like the increase in heroin use, like methamphetamine, like cocaine, and really not paying as much attention to other substances like alcohol, marijuana, prescription pain meds. Second major issue is timely engagement, and access to assessment and treatment really matters. And just as early identification is critical, so is timely engagement and assessment. And so if you are, next slide, if you're on the treatment provider side, and you're looking at engaging these families, then you start to look at an assessment protocol that, working in collaboration with your partners, you also have to look at some really critical questions. How's the individual referred for an assessment to you? And hopefully that's not just a phone number that somebody hands and says, call this number and go in and make an assessment. On an average, how long does it take you to get from referral to assessment? Who conducts the assessments? How's the information communicated again, communicated to child welfare staff, to the courts, and how's that information communicated back to the parent? And are you on the same page with what your child welfare partners are telling? What happens if a parent doesn't show for an assessment? And this gets into the issues of engagement and retention in services. And then one of the ones that I probably would not have thought as much about before, but I certainly am hearing it a lot lately, is what happens if treatment is indicated? How is that information conveyed back to the parent and conveyed back to the social worker, and how is that incorporated into the case plan? But even more importantly, what happens if they go to you for an assessment and treatment is not indicated? We've been working with social workers to identify parental substance use. They think there's an issue. They do a screening, they make a referral, they send them on to you, and in your determination, treatment's not indicated. There's a concern with this family. How do you together talk about other things, other ways that you might intervene, or other supports this family might need? And probably more than anything else, is there a warm handoff at each of these different opportunities for engaging? When you're, one of the things that we said early on, when you start to look at whether or not you're on the same page, is really understanding each other's language too. And what does it mean in one system when you say screening? What does it mean when you say assessment? What's successful completion? Assessment in and of itself, and every system tends to use assessment in a different way, but assessment's an ongoing process, and it's something that you're going to be doing together collaboratively throughout the life of this case. And it means that you're not only going to look at the presence and immediacy in the very beginning and determining, does the problem even exist and how urgent is it? It means that you really need to pay particular attention to what happens over the course of that case. How are you each monitoring it? How are you responding to the issues? Are you in sync with how you're responding to the issues? And did the interventions that you're doing with that family work? The next issue goes right along with the sort of the critical nature of identifying and screening early, but rethinking engagement. And this is an issue that we hear constantly. We recently were reviewing some cases, and we kept hearing they're not ready. We didn't refer them because they were not ready. We didn't make the referral on to the assessment provider because they wouldn't go. They said they wouldn't go. And it gets perceived as being non-responsive. It gets perceived as being non-compliant. It certainly gets perceived as parents aren't going to cooperate. And it really boils down to, do we really understand the principles of engagement, and have we done absolutely everything that we can possibly do to reasonably engage these parents early on so that they can be successful in this, or are there a number of barriers that are in place that are really preventing them from being engaged? So what that means, again, is it means all of you need to be on the same page in terms of the principles of effective engagement. Not only is this a collaborative process, one in which you really need to think about how are we motivating, how do we feel about the families that are coming in front of us, and do we believe that that recovery is possible? Do we believe that they can really engage in services and that we're going to do everything that we can to make that happen? Are our services family-focused as opposed to being focused on the individual adult or the safety needs of the child? And then have we really began to understand the barriers that are in place in all of our systems, not intentionally, but there are barriers that are there, and have we done everything that we possibly can to eliminate those barriers? And those barriers can be organizational, they can be interpersonal, they can be environmental. I mean, in terms of interpersonal barriers, things to pay particular attention to are the trauma that these families that we know that they bring to bear, the trauma with the children, and something that we talk about a lot anymore, but also the trauma that these parents have experienced in their own lives. Accessibility, the appropriateness and the quality of services. Is it the type of service and the length of service that is really going to make the difference for this parent? And then, of course, a whole host of other environmental issues that these families come with. Some of the strategies, and you're certainly going to hear this more when you listen to the Connecticut group, really looking at, we talked about cross-systems agreements, cross-training for staff, and that's not individual training in each of your own systems. While that's very important, it also means that working together to do that cross-training. Co-location of services is a really good strategy that's proven to be effective. Coordinated case management, you're going to hear more about the recovery specialist model that Connecticut has in place. Peer supports have proven to be very effective with these families in reducing barriers. And one of my favorites anymore is to really do either a literal or a virtual walkthrough so that you also understand what barriers exist for our parents coming into our systems. Again, probably not intentionally, certainly not intentionally, but they do exist. I was reading a report last night, and it talked about transportation being a major barrier for this mom with young children, and the irony is that in order for her to access the transportation that would be available to her, she had to get down to the office to sign up for transportation, and even that was a barrier. And as a young mom with 3 young children and taking multiple buses to get there and be there on time, I don't know that anybody realized how much of a barrier that was. And finally, this notion of rethinking treatment readiness, and again, this is something we hear all the time, well, they haven't hit bottom. That might be too late. And certainly when you're talking about the need to engage both the parents and address the needs of the children, waiting over a period of time until someone says, I'm ready to go in, is really risky, and it really could possibly be too late. It means to rethink what that is, raising the bottom. We've talked about earlier engagement, early identification. I'm struck by how many times parental substance use could be identified as a factor in the case, but it's not enough to substantiate it, and so nothing's done, and then the referral comes back again, and you can go through this pattern for a long period of time, and you see multiple referrals before it's progressed to the point where someone then has to step in and do something about it. It means really rethinking how can we intervene earlier on, not assuming that parents don't want to do the right thing by their children, and not assuming that because they haven't engaged that there's not a willingness or a readiness there at some point. And finally, we use a tool which I would strongly urge you to do, and we can certainly explain more about how to use this, called the Dropoff Analysis. And the Dropoff Analysis is a way of really looking at your system, looking at your parents right now, and using some of your own data to talk about gaps and barriers and where they might fall off in a system, and recognizing that, again, there are some barriers in place that would prevent them from being successful in this. And so in this case, they looked at 221 cases that were referred for substance use assessments. Of those 221 cases, 169 received the assessment, 24% drop-off. The numbers that were referred for substance use treatment, 166. And of those, how many made it to treatment? 162. and 85 successfully completed. And of those 85 that successfully completed, then you go back to look and say, were they able to keep their children at home during that period of time, or if the children had been removed, were they able to successfully reunify with those children? These numbers aren't as bad as we've seen in some cases. Sometimes they're quite striking, but it tells you where some of those drop-off points are. Doesn't necessarily tell you why they're dropping off, and so that requires you to dig deeper into that and to really look at what are some of those barriers. But it certainly gives you a good understanding of, if I made a referral for an assessment and my referral was to hand somebody a phone number and they didn't show, that's probably not the best strategy for getting that parent there and ensuring that they get there. And finally, there are a range of strategies that, when you look at collaborative practice, that are really effective when working with families with substance use issues. And whether you're pairing a counselor and a child welfare worker, whether you're co-locating a counselor at an office or a court, you're using substance abuse specialists, you're doing multidisciplinary case planning, or as you're going to hear from the Connecticut folks, the recovery specialist model that has worked particularly well there. So with that, I would like to introduce Mary Lou Giovannucci, and she's the CIP Director for Connecticut with the Judicial Branch. We've worked with Connecticut a lot over the years, and they have one of the strongest partnerships, collaborations that we've seen. They not only have built that collaborative and continue to sustain that collaborative in their work, but they continue to look for new opportunities to jointly serve these families across systems. So, Mary Lou, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you introduce your team. Mary Lou?
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I'm Mary Lou Giovannucci. I'm a manager in the Court Operations Division of the Connecticut Judicial Branch. I'm also the Court Improvement Project Director for Connecticut. And with me today are Christine Lau, who is the Regional Administrator of Region 4 at the Department of Children and Families, our child welfare agency, Janet Story, who's the Behavioral Health Program Manager for the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, which is our single substance abuse and mental health agency here in Connecticut. And finally, Jane Ungamack, who's an Assistant Professor at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine, who has worked with us from the beginning of our project as our evaluator and has provided us with a great deal of support around our data collection. So today we're going to be talking to you about the Recovery Specialist Voluntary Program. This program is one that is self-designed. It's both a policy and practice model, and I emphasize that because, as Linda mentioned, we set about trying to improve our outcomes for children and their families related to substance abuse and addiction recovery, and really realized early on that we couldn't just develop a practice model, that we really needed to emphasize and change our policies and the way we think about substance abuse as it relates to our child welfare cases. RSVP, as we refer to it, is a voluntary program that's offered to caregivers when their children are removed by court order because substance abuse has been determined to be a factor in the removal. The program is introduced to parents and other caregivers at the first court hearing after a child has been removed. And it's at that point that the parent can agree to participate and then become subject to a court order. You've heard both Linda and Nancy speak about collaboration, and we in Connecticut felt strongly that we couldn't move forward with changing policy and practice without forming a very strong collaboration. And that collaboration includes our Child Welfare Agency, DCF, our Mental Health and Substance Abuse Agency, DMIS, the Judicial Branch, along with our Advanced Behavioral Health, which is our administrative services organization, which is responsible for administering substance abuse treatment programs around the state. One of the unique qualities of our collaboration is that we reached out to our Office of Public Defender and our Office of Attorney General. In Connecticut, the Office of the Public Defender provides contract counsel for both parents and children, and our Office of the Attorney General provides agency representation to our Child Welfare Agency. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that this collaboration and this project and this program that has evolved as a result of our collaboration really began because of the in-depth technical assistance that was provided to us by the National Center for Substance Abuse and Child Welfare. So today what we hope some key takeaways will be for you through this webinar really have to do with funding, with data sharing, with communication, and with generally looking at your systems and how you can collaborate to improve the outcomes for families. So very briefly, you're going to hear more about each of these key points, but our initiative was funded not with new dollars, but with dollars that were repurposed from a program that had existed for a number of years that was a joint program between our Child Welfare Agency and our Substance Abuse Agency. In addition to that, we worked together to create braided funding, which included court improvement dollars, to provide cross-system training for all of our system partners. We were able to redeploy funds that were saved because, as a byproduct of the program, there was a reduction in hair tests that were conducted. And currently, we're leveraging competitive federal dollars to test other new models that we hope will allow us to shift more dollars into the RSVP program. This program really started from the ground up, so really from the worker field level on up to the administrative level. So we like to think about it as having begun organically. There were two key components that really helped us to make this program work. One of them was to really determine how we were going to effectuate communication and confidentiality at the client level, and how we were going to make that possible so that the systems that previously hadn't spoken to each other or were not, for a variety of reasons, including confidentiality laws, able to speak to each other. So through that process of developing memorandums of understanding and a standing order, we were able to really decipher and discern that slippery slope of communication and information sharing. And in addition to that, we went a little bit farther than just an MOA, and we developed a data use data sharing agreement that has allowed us, each of the systems, to share data and has allowed us to inform our own practice and is really helping us to evaluate our outcomes. And you'll hear a little bit more about that from Jane Ungemak shortly. So when we started thinking about what the landscape was like in Connecticut for children and their families who were affected by substance abuse, we used, with the help of the IDTA, we began to look at who are our parents, what is their, what happens to them, and what does the landscape look like here? So what we found was that 1 in 3 parents are referred by DCF for evaluation and treatment for substance abuse, a substance abuse problem, ever entered treatment. Parents were, where parents have their children removed, those children stayed out of their parental home much longer. With using court data, we were able to determine that 1 in 3 removal cases involved substances. And one of the things that's unique to Connecticut is that Connecticut tends not to have a culture of using specialized courts. So we did not have a family drug court, and it was not a model that we felt we were able to implement here. So I'm now going to turn things over to Christine Lau, who's going to talk to you a little bit about our child welfare system and some of the barriers and some of the engagement and treatment models that the agency has recently adopted.
So good afternoon. I'm going to start off by talking about barriers for substance abusing families in the child welfare system, which are really experiences in Connecticut that I'm sure all states and jurisdictions have. And that is that parents often have difficulty navigating the three major systems that become involved in their lives when, certainly when they come to the attention of child welfare. Between child welfare, substance abuse treatment, community, and the court systems, those are very large and sometimes complicated experiences for families. Like in other places, there is a lack of communication between the systems. There were very few opportunities for us to talk to one another. Conversations between child welfare staff and the treatment providers happened at just certain points in time, maybe recovery among child welfare staff and the court systems. Although, speaking as someone coming from the Child Welfare Agency, I thought we understood treatment and recovery, but I've come to realize now that in fact it was a very limited and superficial awareness. The systems have differing perspectives and goals. Certainly our focus in child welfare is the primary safety of children. For the treatment providers, it was ensuring that their clients were receiving treatment, and it was really happening without, I guess, the concept that they were treating these adults without sort of understanding, I wouldn't say understanding, but without the recognition of the children that may be in our care or for whom we had significant concerns for. And certainly the court's goal is to sort of move the process along when cases were filed in court. And then there was limited ability and willingness to share information. I think one of the largest barriers we experienced were these competing time frames between the adult substance abuse treatment system and child welfare with respect to ASPA and our timelines for moving children to permanency. We were really, as I like to say, two ships passing in the night. We're not on the same sort of plane as far as that goes. I want to talk a little bit about Project SAFE, which has been in existence since 1998 in Connecticut. It's a statewide substance abuse evaluation program that's co-funded by DCS and is administered by ABH, which is the organization you heard Mary Lou speak to earlier. Project SAFE provides priority access for evaluations for parents that have become involved in the child welfare system. Most often those evaluations happen by way of urine drug screens. Project SAFE also provides outpatient treatment if it's recommended as a result of the evaluation, and that's done through a statewide network of approximately 50 providers in our state. So many of those providers do both the evaluation and treatment. Project SAFE is the care of last resort in our state for parents and caregivers without health insurance. And lastly, in 2008, Project SAFE was legislatively mandated. I want to just talk briefly about how clients come to be referred to Project SAFE. What you see on the screen there is a historical look at the use of the GAIN short screen. But actually, before I talk to that in some detail, what I want to share is that referrals for Project SAFE evaluation to ABH are made by the social worker, made by the CPS social worker, following an interview with the family. The majority of referrals, I shouldn't say the majority of the referrals because I think it's pretty much across the board. I guess most often I'll say, happen in the beginning stages in our investigations or in our intake phase. Is really where things sort of get the ball rolling. But we do have quite a few referrals being made by our ongoing services workers. And so they essentially make the referral to ABH, and the ABH forwards that request for an evaluation to a provider in the community. So screening of child welfare clients, the department had been using, I think we started using the GAIN short screen in 2006 to assess for substance abuse referral. And we had a considerable investment in training social work staff, including our clinicians. We have on staff in each of our area offices what we call regional resource group clinicians, and in that group is a substance abuse clinician, and so invested, as I said, a lot of time in training those staff. The workers were required to complete the GAIN short screen before they made the referral to ABH. Over time, what we heard is that the CPS staff did not like the GAIN short screen. It had to be administered in a very deliberate and specific fashion. They were trained that they couldn't deviate from the tool. And they didn't really feel that families were being truthful in the substance abuse section. The other domains of the GAIN short screen, if people are familiar, we actually felt gave us some decent information about functioning, but didn't really give us a true picture of substance abuse, and they didn't feel it was really very engaging. So in 2011, in the early part of 2011, DCF began to implement a new practice model with a very strong emphasis on family engagement. We are also in the process and went into full implementation in 2012 of implementing a differential response system. Again, family engagement is a very strong component in that system. With the implementation of DRS, the GAIN, as we designed the family assessment response, the GAIN was dropped as an expectation for those staff. As they began to practice, they believed that the GAIN was really not useful, it wasn't comfortable, and it was a barrier to engaging families. Shortly after, our investigation staff, and I'm going to assume that folks know about differential response in this sort of two-track system, the investigation staff, because we were really preaching family engagement across the board, and so investigation staff, began to say the same thing. It really was not did not engage families well. And so instead, we developed. We really began to develop staff to use their critical thinking and to assess factors and indicators that would point to substance abuse. We developed sort of a set of 9 questions that they would use to that would screen for risks related to substance use. Things like, did the client appear to be under the influence? Was there evidence in the home? Was there a positive drug screen at birth? Were there allegations in the report? So we began to really reduce a reliance on that screening tool and begin to assess families' strengths and needs, and really doing so by partnering with them every step of the way. We've had the opportunity through our partners at DEMIS and this collaborative to train staff in motivational interviewing to engage families, and that actually continues to date. Turn it over to Janet.
Oh, okay. Good morning and good afternoon. Wish I was in California. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Recovery Specialist Voluntary Program, RSVP. I'm from the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, and very loose as a single state agency for substance abuse and mental health treatment. So you're a parent, and somehow you've been identified by DCF as not being able to take care of your child, and it's because of substance abuse, and all of a sudden you're in court. I can imagine, I've never been there, but I can imagine it would be very overwhelming and very, very sad. So one of the first things that happens is, and as we talk about assessment and screening and engagement, the CSO is the first of a series of screeners that the parents, mostly mothers, will encounter. CSO advises the parent about RSVP. Maybe you have a shot at avoiding this horrible circumstance, but you have to talk to the recovery specialist about it. So this is the point where parents are introduced, a parent or a caregiver is introduced to a navigator who will kind of hold their hand and explain everything to them that really nobody else has the time. The person is committed to them and to engaging them. Because of all of the training that we've been talking about all along, we really have the training that's taken place with the social workers, with court personnel. We've all developed a clear and shared understanding of how addiction recurs and the process that is recovery. We talk about engaging people into treatment, but to me, I was struck by the fact that we all had to be engaged in this process. The workers had to be engaged in carrying out our buying into RSVP, the attorneys, everybody has to be engaged. We also have to have a process of validating that the person is achieving milestones in recovery. The value of building recovery capital and of recovery coaching. So those are the sort of shared definitions that we have. All of this has, because of things that I'm going to talk about in the next slide, we've had a lot of communication mechanisms and including case conferences, reports from recovery specialists, and this has increased and improved communication and exchange of information across the system, and as well our sense of shared risk. And all of this is done within the required timeline. Could you tap the next one, please? And so this is our shared mission. We talk a lot about stakeholders, and in my mind, RSVP is like the big tent that we're all trying to put up to provide shelter from these storms like we're having outside our window right now, the storms that are brought on by substance use disorders. And all of us at DCF, at the court, at DEMIS, the recovery specialists, and most of all the families and the treaters are the ones holding the stakes that are helping to put that tent up and move families and children especially into a sense of well-being and safety and permanency. So the overall goal is to increase our state system, the entire system that touches the child, the capacity to better serve families impacted by substance use disorders. Primarily, we do this by thinking and by being, as a system and as individuals, recovery-oriented, thinking in terms of family-centered care, and that's one of the keys to the effectiveness of the program. Being able to use recovery specialists as advocates and bridging the work that needs to be done across the different systems at the court with DCF, and also improve access to the services, the basic services that meet basic needs for families, is part of what is enables this system integration as the recovery specialists themselves. On the next slide, I'll expand on how we have facilitated this collaborative problem solving, bridged the different policies, and improved communication. And again, it's really all a lot about engagement. So the structure, as Mary Lou mentioned, is that we have a memorandum of understanding across agencies and the data use agreement. We are able to have our systems talk to each other, have some matched and DFT identified data that we can use for evaluation. It's really important, of course, everybody knows the bottom line important thing is to have the support of leadership. And we have also support from the leadership of ABH, Advanced Behavioral Health, and our academic partners. Now, the collaborative problem solving, or the collaborative problem resolution, bridging systems, and improving communication, this was all achieved over a long period of time through one by one engaging people in the system. We have core management teams that take place once a month, and all of the state and regional leaders are there. We have SAMS meetings that take place every 1 or 2 weeks. The Substance Abuse Managed Service Systems, they're attended by treaters, DCF, and DEMA staff. Individual cases are discussed to resolve particular issues, find services, and collateral supports for families. So basically what we've done is with the training, with the meetings, with the increased and improved collaboration and communication, we have institutionalized mechanisms that promote improved individual program and system outcomes. And we've done this instead of having a family court or drug court. And now I am, let me talk a little bit about the 3 phases of RSVP. The first phase is 2 or more meetings per week if the person's in outpatient treatment. And 2 or more, although we do have 6, 7 residential treatment centers, and some random drug screening. Now that decreases over the second and third phase. A lot of what the recovery specialist is doing is engaging, keeping the parent motivated, validating, as I said, when they get a positive test, they're validating them. They're helping them get to the recovery support groups. They're helping them meet their basic needs. And they participate in case conferences as well with these parents. So these are the key program components. The recovery specialist, I wish you could all see our little movie that we have because it really shows how these people impact the lives of these parents and caregivers. They are trained, as we said, to do motivational interviewing. They get them into all the services they need, random drug screens. And this is important because we were talking about confidentiality issues. If a parent fails a drug screen, it isn't reported to DCF, it isn't reported to the court. It's used as a tool to help them recover and the validation if they get a positive. So it's not punitive at all. They provide the recovery specialists provide all the compliance reports to DCF and the courts and the attorneys and really start the parent on a road to building their own recovery capital through advocacy for them and coaching. And am I doing the same meeting too? Okay.
Yeah. I think I'm doing it.
Okay.
Okay. So this is Chris Lau again from DCF, the Child Welfare Agency. I want to talk a little bit about, you heard Janet mention the Substance Abuse Managed Service System meetings, which is really a core foundation of our collaborative approach, and is in existence in most of the department. It is absolutely, these meetings are in existence in the regions where RSVP is operating. It's a unique feature, we believe, to Connecticut, and it really develops organically on the local level and expanded from office to office, region to region, because it was supported by the local leadership. The meetings are held weekly or bi-weekly depending on your office. They're solution-focused. They're facilitated by DCF. There's a case overview that's presented by the DCF social worker, and there's active participation at the meetings from DMIS, ABH, and our local treatment providers. SAMS is intended to support recovery capital. We view it as a systems intervention, essentially what happens at the meeting. And this is actually, there's all kinds of confidentiality issues in place. A family is made aware that they're being presented at SAMS to help alleviate any barriers that they're experiencing, to broker services, to develop plans for a collaborative approach to problem solving. There's a good, strong communication among the providers and DCF, and it's really opportunities for engagement and treatment to take place. I will say that this is where, as I mentioned earlier, my belief, having participated in many of these, is this is really where the learning takes place for all of the systems involved, where the child welfare worker comes in and is, gains new knowledge about the treatment system, where the treatment providers gain knowledge about how the child welfare system works. We have DMIS, our state agency, at the table helping us to understand how that system works as well.
And the core component to this, we think, is also unique, and it's important in that we looked at our court system, and for those of you who are on the webinar who are part of courts, you know that cases are heard usually in sequential order, usually with as much time as the court can spare. But one of the components of RSVP is that we use an existing model which we call case status conferences, but in a bit of a different way. The case status conferences are facilitated by our staff, who are called court services officers. And they meet with the attorneys in the case, the child welfare worker, the agency attorney, and the parents. And the purpose of the case status conference is to really help the parent to understand what the effect of their own recovery efforts are as it relates to their court case. So often the recovery specialist presents a compliance report at the case status conference, and everyone has a chance to look at that report. And the report includes the results of drug screenings. It includes information about attendance at treatment, at self-help groups, and it also identifies barriers that the parent has encountered related to being able to attend their treatment or get into treatment, or to meet other basic needs that they might have, such as transportation and housing. It's at this meeting where the parent has a voice in their court case, and they have an opportunity to talk about their journey in recovery. And we will often talk about the barriers and challenges, or the really positive things that are happening for the parents in their life. I think one of the most enjoyable things at these case status conferences is when the attorneys and the court staff and the social worker can talk about a plan for reunification, or hear that a child is being reunited with their parent who has been successful in their recovery efforts. It also serves as an opportunity not to just hear about compliance, but to engage the legal community around the parent in problem solving around helping that parent along to try and make it possible for them to successfully complete their court-ordered requirements. I'm now going to turn things over to Jane Ungemak, who's going to talk to you a little bit about our data use agreement, about the data that we're using, and some of the outcomes and findings that she's been able to report to us.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. I have been a long-term partner of many state agencies around substance abuse issues, and I joined the RSVP initiative very early on in 2009 before the program was actually implemented. And part of the reason I was invited in was to do primarily a process evaluation with an eye towards outcomes for the future, but also to help make this process and this initiative a data-informed one and really using data for strategic planning. There already had been a decision made to share data across the agencies, but when we initially started, it was all aggregate data that we were using for each agency. Another important aspect of this, and I think that made this evaluation possible and cost-effective, was that it's entirely based on existing administrative and service data from each of the agencies. First step in doing that was to identify key outcomes relevant to each agency, really to reinforce the investment in the process and be able to see the impacts across each of these different systems. I wanted to point out here, I've shown here some of the key issues in the data and types of data that were accessed for this. First of all, DCF's data is all child-centered. It's about the children. The information is specific to the children. But those data also allow us to characterize both the numbers of children involved and their characteristics. The focus in terms of outcome for DCF is, of course, reunification, child permanency, and also concerns about reentry, new cases of maltreatment that may occur subsequently. And there are certain kinds of data we access through DCF systems, including the SDM family strengths and needs assessments conducted by the social workers and safety assessments. DMIS, in contrast and consistent with its culture and mission, is adult-centered. They capture no information about children at all. It's all about the adult entering treatment. But their data also provide us information about the numbers entering treatment as well as their characteristics. Judicial, on the other hand, again, is child-centered. They have very little information about adults. And their key outcomes are time to disposition, the timeliness of replacement, and the disposition status. ABH, with the agency administering the RSVP program, again, had the number and characteristics of clients from their intake assessments, but they also capture information about timeliness of treatment entry. They do functional assessments on a monthly basis across a wide range of domains, including substance abuse, mental health, living situation, child care issues, etc. And they could provide information about program participation and discharge status. What I'm sure is true of all your systems, those who do the child welfare system. These are primarily women who are who have OTCs and are in danger of losing their children. They are young for the most part, most of them under age 35. They tend not to be married. Their support systems are often weak, I guess is the word you might use. And the majority, in our case, 86% of them have one or more children under age 5. So we're talking about young children here that are being affected. this particular slide shows they have lots of other problems. 72% have a history of arrest, and of those, about half of, of the total, about half are currently involved with the criminal justice system. There is significant proportions who have a history of domestic violence and of trauma. We actually think these trauma estimates are very underreported. This is what's reported in intake into the RSVP program. And not surprisingly, given that this is a substance abusing population, they have high rates of concurrent mental health problems. I'll also say most are unmarried, or unemployed. About 20% were actually employed. So that is a critical issue in terms of access to resources. This slide just gives you a quick view of the types of substance abuse problems that we have in this population. Really significant numbers with alcohol, cocaine, heroin, and then what is growing population, especially among younger adults, are painkillers and other opiates outside of heroin. Marijuana is also, unfortunately, we expect to be more of an increasing. There's a lot more marijuana and alcohol use going on that even shows up here, but we're not considered at the level of disorder. So a lot of polysubstance use, obviously. Here's just a selection of key outcomes that I thought you might be interested in. First of all, the cases that are referred to RSVP, the vast majority, 97%, once they were evaluated in RSVP, were indeed determined to need treatment. Of those who are referred, I'm going to say we lose about a third of our cases of eligible cases who are not referred into treatment, but once they are referred, the majority, 84%, actually enrolled and agreed to participate in the program. And of those who participate in the program, 84% actually get into substance abuse treatment subsequently. 68% within 30 days, and I'll say the vast majority of those, a total of 58% are in treatment within 2 weeks. Most of these clients have had a prior history of substance abuse treatment, a long-standing history. The kinds of treatment they get into are very diverse across various levels of care, so they're not ending up in outpatient treatment only. In terms of, just before we go back a little bit, in terms of those interested in outcomes and successful outcomes for substance abuse treatment, the average length of stay, the median length of stay, was 88 days. That's a couple of days short of the optimal 90-day level for treatment. Of those who did enter treatment, 75% of them had a successful discharge from that treatment admission, and that compared to 43% of substance abuse clients statewide. So this is really a remarkable finding for these cases. And then relevant to child welfare and court outcomes, 74% of the children exited from their permanent placement within 12 months. That compared to 49% of all OTC children in the state. And it was even more remarkable considering that we knew before going into this that substance-involved cases had longer placements than those without substance involvement. And just summarizing the findings, we have been successful in identifying parents in need of treatment and enrolling them in the program. Once they comply, they're more likely to be successfully reunited with their children and in a more timely manner. And we also acknowledge that they present with multiple and complex problems that really underscores the need for coordination across service systems. And we also have to acknowledge that there are some challenges still remaining. 1 in 4 of those who are eligible are not referred to RSVP, and we're really trying to get at the bottom of why that's so. We are, however, on the basis of the positive experiences with RSVP, expanding it statewide, and all the data I've just shown to you are based on 3 pilot sites that originally participated in RSVP, the development and refinement. And now we're also moving to obtain access to other needed services, such as housing and mental health services, trauma services. So I think that's all I'll say about that.
And I'm just going to conclude with some very brief comments about sustaining this effort. I think you can see from the data and the information that Jane has presented that it's very, very important to report utilization and outcomes. And we do this monthly, quarterly. We present to all our agency leadership and stakeholders on a regular basis. We're currently undertaking an examination of the economic impact of our program with a hope that we will be able to show how our dollars are being spent more effectively. Every year, we celebrate success with our program participants. Our parents are the focus of those celebrations. And then finally, we're trying some new things. One of the things we're exploring is using pay for success or social impact bond models along with our child welfare agency to fund different kinds of services related to substance abuse. And we're hoping that in the not too distant future we'll be able to talk about those efforts in more detail. And finally, we'd just like to leave you with some words that we use as really guidance for us when we all have a bad day, and that is, together we embrace safety, permanency, and well-being in substance abuse recovery. Our ultimate goal is to achieve positive results for a family that will last a lifetime. And that concludes our presentation. I really would like to thank my co-presenters, and especially like to thank the National Center for Substance Abuse and Child Welfare and the New England ATTC for allowing us this opportunity.
Mary Lou, thank you so much to you and Jane, Chris, and Janet for sharing with us today your experience. We have a couple questions before we turn to highlighting some of the resources that are available through the National Center that I thought we should address first, perhaps. A question came in, can families be involved with the RSVP program before the child is removed, or are they only kids in custody? And then what comprehensive services are available for families before the children enter into custody?
So I'll take that. This is Chris from the Child Welfare System. So RSVP is offered to families only when they've become involved in the court and we've removed their child by an order of temporary custody. And so it is designed to work in that way because it's very much connected to the court following the OTC. In terms of services available to families prior to having their children removed, we do have in our state also a collaborative program, co-funded by DCS, EMIS, and administered by ADH, what we refer to as recovery case management, which can work with families prior to the removal, and very often they do an excellent job of keeping families intact and preventing removal by supporting those adults in their substance abuse treatment and recovery. It's not as intense as RSVP. It's very much meant to be a recovery support where they're assisting the family in staying connected to treatment and working through and navigating multiple systems in the community.
Great, thank you, Chris. And there are some resources that are available through the National Center on trying to address those substance abuse issues before children are removed, and particularly these outreach and engagement efforts, because we recognize that the programs look different, the effort looks different, and there are some resources that are available. Please email us if you'd like more information about that. And then another question about the compliance reports. How has child welfare in Connecticut sort of dealt with the timing of when they get those reports? I don't think we specifically addressed what happens if there's an urgent issue that comes up in between that the RSVP staff know about, that is in between the time that there's a court hearing that needs to be relayed to DCF. How does that work, and how did you work out those agreements about communication in between the hearings and the compliance reviews?
This is Mary Lou, and I can tell you that this was one of the areas where I think we had the most challenges around integrating the legal system into the child welfare system and the treatment system. The compliance reports themselves are provided monthly to everyone in the case, so the lawyers get them, the DCF worker, the agency attorney, the court services officer. However, as part of our memorandum of agreement and the agreement that the parent signs, if there is an emerging issue that raises concerns about safety of a child, the recovery specialist is considered to be a mandated reporter, and they will contact the child welfare agency. What they do, though, is they do it in a very supportive way. For example, if they observe behaviors that they think would put a child at risk, or that there are multiple positive screens when they do their drug screening, the recovery specialist will encourage their client, the parent or caregiver, to call the DCF social worker with them. So it's used as a tool as well. And we were able to work this agreement out because everyone agreed to share some risk. So the long and short of it is that if there are if there are things that the recovery specialist observes that they believe are safety issues, they will report those to the child welfare agency, and will also encourage parents to call and discuss the concerns with their child welfare worker.
Could I just add one more piece to that? So you heard me talk about the SAMS meetings that happen weekly. That's actually another opportunity for the specialist it's a little bit tricky because the reason why this program works is that the specialists are really considered a support to the family, and we're not asking them to report every sort of single thing to the social worker, because we want the parents to trust the specialist. But if there are concerns that are emerging with treatment or lack of follow-up in treatment, or anything that can be brought to the SAMS meeting that could help plug in any gaps in service or anything that might look like it's not going the right way, that can happen at that meeting, because around the table weekly is an array of service providers from our community who may be able to offer up a service or a resource to help that parent either get back on track or to help the specialist to work with the family to get them back on track. So, you know, it's the extreme is, as Mary Lou said, if there's something that's impacting the safety of a child. In these cases, the children are removed from the home, so they're actually, you know, not in the home. So, but there are times when they will call our Caroline and make a report to the agency. Let's say if visitation is going on, or if we're close to reunification. But the SAMS meeting is also an opportunity for the specialist to kind of help get things back on track.
Great. Thank you very much. And another question related to the RSVP recovery specialist. What's the level of credential and education for those staff?
The recovery specialists are bachelor's level individuals, but ABH is highly selective when they hire their recovery specialists. So they're bachelor's level. Some of them may actually be individuals in recovery, but that's not a requirement of the job description. And they receive extensive training and clinical supervision from ABH.
Great. Thank you, Mary Lou. And it's a nice transition for me to talk about some of the resources that are available through the National Center on Substance Abuse and Child Welfare. Number one, we didn't give you the picture of the cover of a resource that is specific to screening and assessment for family engagement, retention, and recovery. We'll show that picture in just a minute. But that's one of the resources that we want to highlight. And then these specifics that the question came up about the level of education and background of recovery specialists working in the child welfare arena. There's a monograph that is available through the National Center website that highlights several different models of programs that have been implemented across the country in various jurisdictions, and highlights the educational background, the way the supervision happens, who actually hires, what their role and responsibility is. So in addition to the RSVP program in Connecticut, there are several others that are highlighted in the monograph about recovery specialists. So it gives you an idea about how different jurisdictions have addressed that issue. But on the screen now, you see some of the principles that were developed as the National Center put together a resource. Actually, one of the first questions in our origination in 2002, as we began work, one of the first questions that we got repeatedly was for screening tools. And another questioner asked about the GAIN. What does the GAIN stand for? The Global Assessment for Individual Needs. And there are different versions of that. The short screen in particular is highlighted in this monograph, SAFER. So the principles about how jurisdictions came together to work on these protocols for screening and assessment with the focus on engaging families in this change process, that a tool was needed, but that the team about how we approach families is so critical about how decisions are made and about how families respond. Someone mentioned in the presentation that they had a tool that was being used, but they didn't really feel that families were necessarily being open and being able to share honestly about their situation related to their substance use, and that the team and the approach became so critical in how to ensure that families had the safety that they needed to be able to do that particular assessment. So that work of how to develop that cross-system collaborative, how to address the screening and assessment protocols, those are materials that are available through what we call SAFER, that monograph cover on the left-hand side. Screening and assessment for family engagement, retention, and recovery. The collaborative practice model, which is a publication that highlights little vignettes of how jurisdictions around the country, again, have developed models that address both screening and assessment and other kinds of collaborative practice that needs to be put in place. The information systems, the sharing of information, the training that's needed, again, you'll find vignettes in that monograph on ways in which jurisdictions have addressed that issue. And then in terms of some primers that have been developed in helping jurisdictions to, again, understand the basics of cross-system data sources and how to work with these three key partners, if you will, substance abuse, child welfare, and the courts, with some information available to you through those monographs, as well as many others that are, again, are on our website. There you go. The National Center on Substance Abuse and Child Welfare, ncsacw.samhsa.gov, is where you'll find these resources, along with 3 online free-to-you, including CEUs, as we come up to December, and many of you may be looking for opportunities to get your CEUs in for the year. These online trainings are available to you with CEUs that you can download at the end, your certificate to obtain CEUs from your state offices. So 3 different online trainings, one geared specifically to child welfare workers, the second geared to substance abuse treatment professionals and helps with that understanding of the timeline of child welfare, of what information child welfare workers need from you, from the treatment agency, as well as the court process and those ways in which the court operates and the timing factors that are critical under the Adoption and Safe Families Act. And then finally the third curricula, which is geared to legal professionals. I mentioned already the resources that are available on screening and assessment through SAFER, the monograph, and some other kinds of resources that you'll find on our website. I mentioned the specialists, so you know what you're looking for. These are 6 state case studies about how various places have put together recovery specialist models, as well as this critical issue of drug testing and how drug testing resources can be used effectively with a focus on engaging families in this change process, and ways to look at the drug testing protocols that allow that sharing of information and using drug testing as a way not just to monitor what's happening with that individual, but as a way to help them document their case and to provide information about their status and to provide that that incentive that allows them to share that information with their social workers. Some other resources that are available through SAMHSA, we want to make sure that you're aware of the Trauma-Informed Care monograph that has recently been distributed by SAMHSA, in particular as we look forward to our third in our series of webinars with the Addiction Technology Transfer Center that's coming up in March on trauma-informed systems. That this is a great resource for you to be looking at between now and March. Take it home for your holiday reading perhaps, but a great resource in the short run as we prepare for our last webinar in this series in March. Sarah, other resources that are available through the ATTC?
Hi again, everyone. Hello, this is Sarah.
Great. Now we have you. Thank you.
Sorry for that delay. I was just saying to thank you for that wealth of information about the resources through the National Center. We, through the ATTC and also through SAMHSA, have a number of resources to complement the ones that Nancy just described. And this slide here has a number of resources illustrated. At the top of the slide, we have several overview resources. The SAMHSA tips listed there focus specifically on screening and assessing adolescents for substance use disorders, and also a specific tip put out by SAMHSA on treating adolescents with substance use disorders. We, in the Addiction Technology Transfer Center, have also partnered with the National Institute on Drug Abuse to create a suite of blending products that describe effective ways to deliver treatments out in community settings, and there are a number of blending products that are relevant for teenagers, and those can be accessed at the link depicted there. And then the rest of the slide depicts a number of state-specific resources put here, many of which focus on transition age youth, which was another thing that came up when we did our survey as an issue of importance to the region, handling issues when someone is about to age out of the system. And so we wanted to highlight some of those resources for you as well. And next in our webinar series, I'm very excited to announce that we'll be doing a specific webinar focused on trauma-informed approaches to care, because as you see here, when we did our survey that I mentioned earlier in our webinar today, the area of special topic interest that we asked people to rank, trauma-informed approaches to care was the most frequently cited special topic area of interest. So we have partnered with the National Center to meet this training objective, and our next webinar will focus explicitly on this topic. The date has not been finalized yet, but please stay tuned, and we're approximating a March date for that issue, and we really hope that you'll participate once again and join us for that important training event. And now we're right at about the 2:30 mark, but if folks are willing to stay on the line, we're happy to take some additional questions.
We have one additional question for Connecticut. If we can just take maybe 1 minute on your end to answer that from the staff there. Once the services have been completed and treatment has been successful, what kind of wraparound services are provided as families have reunified? Are there ongoing supports that are available through the RSVP program or through other resources in Connecticut?
So there are not services provided through RSVP. However, once the child has been reunified, depending on where you are in the state and the provider system that you have, we would then refer to individual community providers to support that family and to support that parent's sobriety.
All right. Thank you very much for that, and thank you to, again, our partners in Connecticut for the time that you took today, as well as the preparation, to the ATTC, and to Linda Carpenter for sharing your information with the audience today. Again, we thank you very much. We look forward to hearing from all of you and seeing you in March. Happy holidays to you all. There will be an evaluation as you close out of the webinar. Please do the response to us. We do use that for improving our webinar series and production, and would appreciate very much having your input. If there are some questions that were not addressed that you submitted today, especially some of the technical things, we'll be getting back to you individually on those. Thank you all. Good afternoon.